Hello, everyone. You are listening to Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Llorente.
And I'm James Ruzicka. And every episode we watch two films, one old and one new, and then try to make connections between the two. And this episode we're watching Red Notice, which is the new $200 million Netflix feature film with Dwayne Johnson, and comparing it with 1955's Rififi, a black and white French heist movie. So, did you enjoy Red Notice?
I did. I'm not proud to admit it, but I enjoyed parts of it. Absolutely. I think everyone would, so I don't feel like I'm the only one.
It's a curate's egg. It's some kind of egg. Eggs feature heavily in the film. So, let me just kind of describe the movie a little bit in case anyone listening hasn't seen it. So, it starts out with a little fake documentary. Just fill in with a bit of backstory, and apparently there are 3 legendary eggs of Cleopatra. One of them is lost, and we arrive in Rome. There's a big aerial shot, and we get Dwayne Johnson, who's FBI profiler Hartley, not the J.R. Hartley that would be famous to British listeners from 1980s television adverts, and not Hartley's Jam, which is the other thing that Hartley is famous for in Britain. So he's an FBI profiler. He turns up at the museum with Interpol agent Das to declare that the egg at the museum, Cleopatra's egg, has been stolen. Ryan Reynolds, Booze, the thief, is still in the room. Hartley gives chase. They chase over the world's worst constructed scaffolding, and then Ryan Reynolds is lost in traffic. And in Bali, he arrives at his luxurious beach home with his stolen egg, only to find that Dwayne Johnson and Detective Das are already waiting for him with hundreds of soldiers in ski masks. And he's arrested, but the egg is stolen by Gal Gadot, who we now learn is art thief extraordinaire Bishop, the other art thief in the movie. So back in Rome, Dwayne Johnson is drinking in a bar, and Das turns up with the retrieved egg. She smashes it on the floor, destroying a bit of vital evidence for some dramatic impact. And it turns out the egg is a fake. Dwayne Johnson gets arrested by the same 20 people in ski masks, and he's sent to prison in, I think, Russia. It's somewhere snowy and cold. Anyway, it's stereotype Russia.
Siberia.
And surprise, surprise, incredibly, he's sharing a cell with Ryan Reynolds. Who would have thought it? Gal Gadot turns up and she explains the plot. And there's an Egyptian billionaire who apparently wants Cleopatra's 3 eggs for his daughter's wedding, and she plans to get them all, but Ryan Reynolds knows where one of them is. He declines her offer to help, though, so he ends up staying in prison, where he and Dwayne Johnson carry a few polystyrene blocks around on labour duty. And then there's a kind of rather plodding prison break, and machine guns and an RPG and a helicopter, and it's not nearly as exciting as it sounds. It's all very dull. Booth gets them a lift on a plane, piloted by a friend, and the two men, they plan a heist to steal the second egg from a crime boss in Valencia. Have you been to Valencia in Spain?
I have not.
It's a beautiful city, actually. It's really nice that you wouldn't know it from this film. So in Valencia, there's a masked ball at the crime boss's party, and there's a lengthy heist sequence with all the stuff that we've seen from all the heist films that we've seen before. It's lifting fingerprints from a glass and hacking into security cameras, and there's a room full of guards watching monitors. It's the world's worst, most expensive security system. And then Gal Gadot turns up, and she and Dwayne Johnson have a completely chemistry-free, flirtatious dance. And then the crime boss, called Sotto Voce, who's like, is he Spanish? Is he Italian? He has like an English accent. I'm not, and the guy is like a Greek American actor. I'm not sure where he is.
Yep. He's an American actor, very funny. The Sotto Voce is not really a comic part. It gets kind of caricaturish. I had the impression he was Italian.
Right, okay, that's good.
I don't know.
Sotto Voce sounds Italian, doesn't it? So he turns up. Dwayne Johnson and Ryan Reynolds, they break into the impregnable vault. Suddenly, Detective Das turns up, and then she's suddenly outwitted in about 4 seconds, and they're in the vault, and then Gal Gadot turns up, and there's a fight with antique swords and shields that probably should have been fun and clever, but just isn't. And then Voce turns up, and it turns out that Gal Gadot is his girlfriend. Huh? And then Dwayne Johnson and Ryan Reynolds, they get tied up in the basement of a bullfight arena for no very logical reason. There's a bit of torture. Ryan Reynolds spills the beans on where the third egg is. Gal Gadot poisons her boyfriend and walks off with his egg. Then the boyfriend revives just for long enough to shoot a few bullets around before dying again, I think. And Dwayne Johnson and Ryan Reynolds, they escape. And they immediately give up any hope of catching Gal Gadot, even though she literally left the building 15 seconds ago. They just shrug, and instead they climb out of the basement into the bullfight arena, and there's a bit of comedy running around with a bull that belongs in a slapstick film from 1960. And from there, the two buddies, they catch a train to Argentina. I kid you not. I would like to see the map they used when planning out this film. So there is some kind of train that takes you from Spain to Argentina. They have a heart-to-heart conversation about absentee fathers that amounts to them saying, cops and crooks, we're not that different. And it's not like even a metaphor. They actually physically, they literally deliver the line, we're not that different. It's not subtle. And they end up in the jungle in Argentina. Nice to see Dwayne Johnson in a jungle movie, having just seen him in Jungle Cruise for Disney, which apparently was released to streaming the same week as this film as well. So those were your two choices that week. Which jungle shall we watch Dwayne Johnson in? So they're trying to find a cache of Nazi treasure using like a crumpled paper map and a compass. And it did make me wonder, is this film actually set in the 1960s? There's no GPS, no survey data, no smartphones, no off-road vehicles. It's two blokes and a paper map. And they find it. They find the hidden Nazi bunker. And I have to say at this point, I think any film that uses Nazis as a plot point has a responsibility to explain who Nazis were. That we're like 77 years past the end of World War II, and all you would think about Nazis from watching this film is that Nazis are somehow the purveyors of treasure. Like they come across as like the Nazis are the editors of a Sunday newspaper supplement. They're all about men's watches and high performance motor cars and fine art and foreign travel. That's what this film thinks a Nazi is.
I think they've become shorthand archetype for evil, right?
You would hope so.
Yeah.
Kind of the evil is a little bit understated, I think, in this film.
Oh, definitely understated. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just lazy, I think. And it's too bad because we are at a point now where there are very few people who lived concurrently with Nazis who really knew what they were, and it seems to be getting less and less reported and dismissed as fake news or something these days. So,
there's a responsibility to remember who Nazis were. Absolutely,
agreed.
So they find the Nazi bunker. They open it up, and it's Indiana Jones's warehouse. Like Ryan Reynolds is even in whistling the Indiana Jones theme tune. It's not subtle. They're openly admitting it. They find Cleopatra's third egg. Then Gal Gadot turns up. She must have been like 10 seconds behind them the whole way with her own crumpled map. And then Interpol Das turns up with yet another team of 20 guys in ski masks who must have been like 15 seconds behind them. And there's a huge gun battle. Everyone's shooting to kill. No one's fazed by this huge discovery of Nazi secrets. Nobody acts like a policeman. They all just want to shoot anyone who might have tried to claim a random gold egg. Then there's a ludicrous car chase because, of course, every 70-year-old Nazi bunker is full of well-maintained, fully fueled motor cars. They speed down some of the widest mine shafts in the world. Big enough for 2 trucks, and eventually all the SWAT team get killed. And Ryan Reynolds and Dwayne Johnson, they burst out from under a waterfall. Ryan Reynolds swims to the shore. He starts to go back to rescue Dwayne Johnson. And then suddenly he and Gal Gadot show up, and they explain that, you know what? We two were working together all along. And they show a few flashbacks to demonstrate how obvious it all was, when of course it wasn't, because the flashbacks were completely different to the scenes when we saw them first time in the film. This is another one of those lazy devices in a movie. When you get a reveal like this in a movie and it works, it can make the whole film. Turns everything around and it sticks in your mind. It's like Sixth Sense or Fight Club or Usual Suspects, just brilliant. And when it doesn't work, it's just insulting and deflating. I wrote down in my notes here. I wrote here the attempt to pull the rug out from under your feet, but the effect is just to make you notice how poorly laid the carpet was in the first place. So after the big reveal, we cut to an Egyptian wedding. There's a few uncomfortable stereotypes and a couple of cheap gags, and then we get an epilogue where Ryan Reynolds turns up on Dwayne Johnson and Gal Gadot's boat and asks them for help to steal some other valuable thing, so they all agree to team up for a sequel that I'm pretty sure no one wants to watch, all to the tunes of Notorious by Duran Duran. Great. That was Red Notice, 2 hours and $200 million on Netflix.
Notorious.
I tell you, my first question, $200 million, where did it go? The film doesn't look like they spent $200 million to get it all there on screen.
I don't think it went to story development or writers. Or even getting notes from someone.
Did you enjoy this film?
You said that. First of all, you said that the actors were each paid $20 million.
Yeah. So I read that the three leads each got $20 million, and then the director got $10 million. So that's where the first 70 went.
And the credits, I think Dwayne Johnson was a producer. I don't know. If Ryan Reynolds was or not. But that is a lot of money on talent, as it were. So that's what, $70 million between the director and three actors?
Yeah, I think Variety quoted a negative cost of $160 million and then a further 40 for prints and ads, I guess. But that's we still have a $90 million shortfall. Supposedly, a lot of the money was spent because it was filmed during the pandemic, and it was all spent compositing people into scenes where they weren't really there because they couldn't act without masks on. I'm impressed that you can spend $90 million on that.
There's definitely special effects. I mean, you can see it there.
Okay,
this is a real director's film. Every shot is over the top, using all of the gear, the drones, the cranes, the steady cams. So there's definitely a lot going into the technical requirements to make a film like this. And it'll still make money, I guess. I mean, I don't really understand the new format for earnings, the new business model. But if Netflix is, I assume, like the principal funder of it, is this entirely a Netflix project? And it's got it worldwide. I suppose it makes billions somehow, even without people going to theaters. So
I suppose as a proportion of people's Netflix subscription. Apparently, I read that Netflix were touting it as their biggest ever opening, that 3 million households tuned in for at least 5 minutes, which is Netflix's metric of success. They don't explain how many people turned off 6 minutes in.
Yeah.
But that's how they measure. And I must say, you would think if this film was released theatrically, if they sold 3 million tickets, would that be considered a good opening? Maybe it would.
Good question. So that's 3 million views within the first weekend or something like that.
Yeah. So maybe that is a reasonable opening. It says they don't explain how many people they believe bought a new Netflix subscription in order to see Red Notice.
Yeah.
But Netflix are welcome to release and hold on to whatever figures they want, I suppose.
Yeah.
So why? I didn't think this film was all that good, but my question is, why not? Why doesn't it really succeed?
I'm not as eloquent as you are. Your analogy was fantastic. I said this film is an overflowing table setting of set pieces with no table. And I think for me, it just comes down to story. This is a writer-director project. Someone who had a vision, definitely got the talent attached, so it got made despite the high costs. And I think it's kind of a worldwide film. I mean, it, as you said before, it goes from country to country. This is the kind of thing will play well with people in any culture, in any language, in any continent. I think
it has that lowest common denominator appeal, doesn't it?
It's a popcorn, trivial kind of caper film that people used to go. It's a blockbuster. Used to go to the theaters to see it. So I think it's kind of an experiment to see if it works online, and that's why I don't understand entirely how it will. But it's obviously they wouldn't do it if they weren't going to make money.
Apparently, they have greenlit 2 sequels. I was reading, so they're happy enough about it to pay for another 2 to be filmed back to back. Ironically, I think for a film that is set in almost every country around the world, one of the main failures is in world building. I think it's suspension of disbelief. I constantly asking myself, do I really believe the characters would have done this? The same people keep turning up again and again in the same places. It just doesn't quite pass that believability test for me. I think once you lose the believability, it becomes very difficult to invest in the characters or the story.
And it was actually impossible for me to invest myself in it, seriously anyway, because I can't believe that missile's going to go right through one door of the helicopter and out the other because of Ryan Reynolds' piloting skills and The Rock's athleticism to get out of the way. And that sort of thing just happened again and again and again. And as you said, people always show up just at the right time again and again and again. I give you a hall pass. You can definitely do 1 or 2 little bits of disbelief that I can suspend, but you can't do it again and again because I just think you erode any sense of attachment to the story world and the reality. There's just no reason to believe anything that's happening. So, but it's not made for us, Jimmy. We're older guys. This is the 12 to 25-year-old boy market, which is, I think, increasingly the world market. An irony for me is that a lot of this really depends on the wordplay in the script. And the international films, the ones that do well everywhere, are kind of these action pictures where you don't need lots of dialogue. But there's a whole element, a whole layer of this film that depends on Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds and doing a great job of it. Delivering these one-liners and just great timing, and The Rock as the straight guy. And I think that's what I loved about the film. Loved is too strong a word. I'm sorry. What I appreciated and respected about the film was their relationship. Just in the way that they got along and they got through all these capers together. And there's a lot of humorous stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's just really topical and some things that I thought were totally inappropriate as well. I was cringing when Ryan Reynolds was trying to get, his name's Booth, I guess, Nolan Booth. He's trying to get The Rock's John Hartley into trouble in prison so that we later find out, so that he can steal a prison guard's key or something like that. But there's a lot of really inappropriate sort of build up to get there, and it really messes with the tone quite a bit because there's some dark images. He's really going after some dark things, but he's saying it in a funny fashion. I thought that was really inappropriate. The electrocution to the testicles, to me, I mean, it's sort of disrespectful to the political prisoners who really go through that. I mean, it's really kind of a trifling moment in this film, and it's supposed to be intense because Ryan Reynolds is witnessing his new buddy suffering. But as events play out, you realize it's not that authentic, and I was uncomfortable with that scene as well. So there are definitely some tone moments that a careful viewer, I think, would have a problem with. But what comes out overall is these guys, they kind of learn to like each other. They even though they're opposites or think they're opposites, they make a great team, right? And to a certain extent, I think they're well cast, and I think it's something that they can both do well. It's in their wheelhouses, so I think that was the appealing thing for me.
What do you think it's about, this film? This is one of the other question marks I had about it. I was struggling by the end of the film to think, well, what kind of is the theme here? What is it about? Is it that there's no honor among thieves? But there kind of is, and in the end, Ryan Reynolds' character is wants to buddy up with Dwayne Johnson
and the Bishop, and God,
exactly. And then it's the theme, crime doesn't pay, but then crime does pay, and actually they get away with the money. And the only reason they lose the money is because of some off-screen hacking that Ryan Reynolds' character does at the end of the movie. So it kind of feels like I'm not really sure what the theme is here.
I don't think it's those things at all, and it really can't be because you're glamorizing them at every turn. So it's not that, and they're. It's amazing how many friends with either airplanes or trains or helicopters or whatever that Ryan Reynolds has. So they're definitely glorified. So I don't think it's that crime doesn't pay, and it's not that bad guys eventually get their due or anything like that. So for me, it's much more about the partnerships, I guess. And they kind of spell the theme out for us when they're on the train. I don't even know what country they're in. They end up in Argentina somehow. But
they're mid-Atlantic, I think it must be.
It's this train crossing the Atlantic Ocean to get to Argentina, and I think, what is it? The Rock says, "Look, my father was a crook, and I ended up a cop, and your father was a cop, and you ended up a crook, and there's not that much difference between us."
But then, if that's the theme, they blow it at the end, don't they? Because The Rock eventually commits, "Oh, actually, no, I am a crook." So, the reason we have so much in common is because we're exactly the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, they try and have their cake and eat it. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
You were saying earlier on, before we recorded, that you noticed some product placement in the film.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you wanted to know what the film was about. The film was about selling stuff. So, and it sort of harkens back to that, who the audience is. And the audiences are getting wider, I suppose, because I think there are just more ways to make more films that reach more people. So I think we're headed towards a more inclusive film industry in some ways. But the other thing that ties people together is crap. And in this film, there are advertisements that are not so subtle about Coke, Instagram, Etsy, 2 times, I think, Alexa, Windows, the Windows system, Samsung, iPhone, Mercedes-Benz, and even Ed Sheeran gets a little plug for his career, I felt. So it's definitely to sell stuff. And the thing that concerns me is I think with a project like this, that's written into the script. I mean, that's obviously dialogue, and Ryan Reynolds is probably a great ad-libber and such, but I think that stuff is in there intentionally. The power of the Coke to reveal the egg that Ryan Reynolds has replaced the original with is corrosive, to say the least. I mean,
yes, is that an advert or not?
Hardly pours Coke over it, and that reveals that it's a fake. So the power of Coke. Coke is great. Obviously, we should go out and buy some. So I felt like there was definitely that. It's definitely the point of the film, to a certain extent, is to make this film again and maybe plug some more items. So it's not a very subtle setup for the sequel at the very end by any means. As you noted, and I think that's it. It's just to sell another film, probably.
So it should be called Ad Notice and not Red Notice, shouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what the film is.
And it is. It is a lot. It's definitely a big film. It's definitely trying to please people with all the action and set pieces, but it's not a great film by any means. But I see the power of it. I see why it is popular on Netflix, and
we've got at least 2 more to come. So there's no escaping it. Yep.
And maybe that's why it's not about anything cut and dry, is because they're going to make a couple more. So
to explain the story.
I do agree with you entirely on the final reveal. Just felt pasted on, and those were some scenes that didn't really give that information very clearly when we first saw them, and it just felt like that even may have been something that came along in editing farther down the line to make the story more interesting.
Yep. Yeah, it feels like a cheat, doesn't it? And which means that you leave the movie feeling a bit cheated. It's not. I don't think as an audience member you feel respected by this film, which is that's a grave mistake, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Well, that was Red Notice. After the break, we will have a chat about 1955's Rififi.
And we are back. And we are going back in time to 1955 for the film Rififi. That's Rififi, which takes place in Paris, entirely in Paris. It does not jump around the world. It takes place entirely in Paris in the 1950s, definitely in a world of sort of underground crime and criminals. This is also a heist film, so it's well paired with Red Notice.
I would say, this is like the heist film, isn't it? This is the heist film that is the granddaddy of all the heist films that we watch today.
Exactly. I don't think you have Red Notice without Rififi. In some ways, it's definitely laying down the foundation, and the characters feel like, I think, archetypes or even cliches, stereotypes now, But I think in 1955, these were probably some of the earliest versions that we saw of high stakes thieves or even gangsters or whatnot. It definitely has a noir look. It has a noir film. It's about noir characters. These are men who kind of have their eyes set and their dreams set on upward mobility via crime, I guess. Tony is our protagonist. He's recently out of prison. We meet him in a poker match where he's coughing, so he's ill. We know this guy's unhealthy. He seems to be down on his luck after getting out of prison, and he has no money to play the next hand of poker or whatnot, so he gets his friend Joe involved. We're immediately, by calling him, I guess, we're immediately introduced to Joe in a very warm, family-like environment where he's playing with his son. His wife is there. He takes the call from Joe and goes to help bail him out. We learn, certainly that shortly thereafter, that Tony's ex-girlfriend, Mado, has now picked up, and she's sort of living with or dating a guy named Pierre Gruter, I think his name is. He is the owner of a nightclub called L'Ange d'Or. And you, Jimmy, said that you call it a hostess club. Is that right?
I think that's what it is. It's one of those clubs where you pay money to go in, and then you get to sit next to an attractive lady who will order expensive champagne on your behalf.
Okay.
I think that's how it works. I think that's a hostess club.
Okay, and where guys like Tony would hang out.
I got to say, this is my pun of the week. I was overjoyed when I realised that the large door, the nightclub, actually has a really small door. I patted myself on the back when I noticed that.
It's an ironic name for the club, I suppose. It's a small door that goes down into a basement club, so it's definitely got this wonderful secrecy about it. It's sort of an illicit nightclub, and the women down there are dancers and singers, and like all the women in the film, they're not really great character roles to play. They are there to serve the men. And Tony's in tough shape. He's got no girlfriend. He needs money. So he's sort of being asked by Joe and his partner Mario to steal some jewels from a sort of a rich jewelry shop in a neighborhood in Paris. Because of his condition, Tony wants to do it, but it's not really clearly spelled out. But somehow Tony convinces them to go a little bit bigger and actually get into the safe, as opposed to sort of pulling off some job where they're just pulling some jewels that are in the window.
He wants to go big or go home. Isn't
he wants to go big or go home, and Mado is, I guess maybe she's one of the inspiration. He wants to get her back, but he treats her very poorly, and I guess that's a good segue to talking about some of the women. He invites her to his home. She does come. He sort of slowly talks her through undressing, and then I think it's mostly done off screen, but he has her in the bedroom, and he actually beats her up instead.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it?
It's shocking. It's uncomfortable. Violent. Yeah, it's a bit of characterization, which is harsh, but that's who he was. By today's standards, it would be awful. Back then, I'm sure it was too. I hope it was.
It's a great example of like showing character through action, though, isn't it? It's like, Tony doesn't explain who he is in words, but he shows us who he is by what he does. It's great. It's great kind of cinema character.
Yeah. And one thing that reminded me of characterization was, or the characterization specifically in Red Notice, is when we're sort of getting a proper introduction to the Ryan Reynolds character, Hartley's character, Dwayne Johnson's part. He's an FBI profiler, and he tells Ryan Reynolds his entire life. He's able to give like this whole biography, and it seems ridiculous, but I guess it's in keeping with the character. He is a FBI profiler. He would know these things if he studied Ryan Reynolds' character, but it's ridiculous characterization. It's just exposition. Whereas here,
you would think that Ryan Reynolds might know what his know exactly. What his character is.
Exactly. For Tony, I know he's been in prison. I know he's ill. I know he needs money, and I know that he's not nice to his ex-girlfriend. So I mean, it's effective. It's uncomfortable to watch. But the women in this film are generally sort of weak in the kitchen. They're cooking. Joe's partner or wife has a child she takes care of. They're kind of out of the loop. They're not really that aware of what's going on with their husbands or partners. And
I mean, the women in this film, I think they're largely objects, but I can't quite decide whether it's the film that treats them as objects or the male characters.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the male characters definitely do, so we know that for certain. And I think this is based on a story, so I don't know the source material. I think there was a book that this is based on.
I saw an interview with Jules Dessin actually, where he was saying that the original book, he had to change a lot of it because all of the bad guys were North Africans in the book, and he was kind of saying, I don't think he could get away with that. And I think the producer was saying, well, what are you going to make the bad guys in? Why don't you make them Americans, or are you going to make them English? And he said, well, why don't we just make them French? Which the producer thought was like this genius idea that he'd never really thought of.
Yeah. Well, and it is interesting. Jules Dessin is actually American. Grew up with Russian parents. Probably had spoke Russian. But in this film, he's the director. But he also plays Cesar, who's the fourth character in the heist group, who's an Italian. He's like the excellent, the safe cracker. I guess that's what they call him these days. So he's brought in from Italy. So in the film, he's sort of speaking bad French, and he's speaking with an Italian accent, or is Italian very often. So it's an interesting, I don't know how his own French was, but Jules Dessin does this sort of interesting thing where he plays a foreigner speaking in French at times, lots of Italian, even though he's an American. So it was an interesting role that he gave himself. So basically for Tony, at least, it's kind of prison or poverty. The stakes are high. He wants to maybe get his girlfriend back, but he definitely wants money. So it's a very clear thing that they need. And we get to the sort of what I consider the end of the act, first act, where they figure out how to disarm the alarm, which is going to alert the police or others to the fact that they're going to be pulling off this heist. And then we go into a long 29-minute sequence of just classic cinema where, without a single word of dialogue, they manage to get into sort of the neighbor building of the jewel shop, drill a hole through the floor. They're trying to get down into the safe from above. A great bit of characterization that you really drew to my attention was as they are binding and tying up the concierges of the building. I think it's Joe puts a pillow behind the woman's head. They're making their victims comfortable, even though they're they're gangsters. They're kind of good guys, or there's something human about them.
Yeah, it's a nice little character moment.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic stuff. And then the entire scene is fantastic.
It's one of the greatest sequences in noir cinema, isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah. It's 29 minutes. There's no dialogue, not even any music either.
That's right.
It's action and sound, and that's it. It's fantastic. Just incredible.
I read that there was a composer working on the film, and they did compose something, and they decided to go with no music for the scene. So you get to really see the detail, and this is the complete opposite of Red Notice in the sense that Ryan Reynolds or Dwayne Johnson always tell you exactly how they're going to do something, and the director shows how they've done it in Red Notice. In this film, we go right from them figuring out something very simple, like just how are we going to silence this alarm, and then all of a sudden they're actually doing the heist. There's no plotting that we see. And what I noticed was the characters look like they've rehearsed it perfectly, but I'm not really sure that I should say the actors, but the characters in the film, it feels really current. It's a surprise. We have no idea, so we're in on that scene, curious about how they're going to do this the whole time, and it's because they've rehearsed it very well. We haven't seen it on camera, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but the actors obviously know what they're doing, and there's lots of glances and a lot of sort of hand gestures and whatnot that take us through it. And they pull out this umbrella at one point, and how are they going to steal millions of dollars worth of jewelry with an umbrella? But it's part of the entire process, and it's wonderful how it all comes together, and we see it right there in real time, and it's kind of it's like it's fresh for the actors, it's fresh for the characters, it's fresh for the audience as well, which makes it
you're
really
so in the moment watching this. It's you're seeing every moment unfold, and it's like you are keeping silent in sympathy with the characters. So I would love to see this film in a packed cinema, because you can feel how the audience would be just as quiet as the characters, breathing shallowly and holding your body tense, because the tension is right there. You're right in it.
Yeah.
It did make me wonder, why is this not the norm for cinema these days? This is such a wonderful silent sequence. Why is this not in every noir film, or every heist film, every crime movie, every action movie? Why do so very few films attempt this kind of direct visual storytelling these days? I just don't really understand it.
Great question. Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for you. I think to a certain extent we're uncomfortable with silence, so we expect someone to talk us through it. I mean, the talkie sections in Red Notice that cover the same sorts of material, the same sort of scenes, it's all about dialogue.
It's all you get the fingerprints while I disable the cameras. It's absolutely. So it's people.
These two films are well paired
what
because
they're going to do, and then doing it, and then
films,
watching you do it, and then afterwards them saying, "Well, we did that."
But the heists themselves are night and day between the two films. And I think we are starting to see there. As I said before, I think there's just so much more filmmaking now that I think we're going to start to see more pure films and whatnot, where it's just cinematic language. It's really just telling stories through pictures, or at least sequences like that. And I have seen a few films like that in the last couple of years. So I think we'll start to see it. Maybe it could just be we're cycling through a talkie age. Everything's on the internet. I mean, there's like lots and lots of talking on the internet. Lots of exposition, basically, and I think that's kind of where we are right now. There's
too many words.
Yeah, too many words.
I was racking my brains trying to think of a contemporary example of a film that does the same thing, and the best I could come up with was No Country for Old Men, which has a number of sequences where there's no dialogue. But that film even is 15 years old now. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. Well, let's keep an eye out for that going forward, for sequences like this, because this is considered a classic in the genre, and definitely that scene alone is very, very telling, but without using words to tell, I guess.
Yeah, pure cinema.
Pure cinema. For me, the end of Act 2, it also sort of is, there's much more emphasis on the process of getting into the safe than there is of actually getting the jewels themselves. That lasts a little bit. So the acts 1 and 2 kind of end with work around the alarm and how they disable it twice. So you see it in practice, and then you see it in the execution of the heist. And it's kind of interesting that he sandwiches the moments that way.
Right, yeah.
Their comeuppance is in Act 3, basically. A foolish error by Cesar, who gives a ring stolen in the heist to one of Guter's girls, one of the ladies who was the singer at L'Age d'Or. And that sort of turns on Guter to the fact that Tony and his guys are responsible for this heist that has come to people's attention. And then, boy, it's kind of one funeral procession of a third act where Grutter or the police end up taking out one by one the four guys: Mario, Joe, Cesar, and Tony. There's a funeral procession for Tony within the third act where the police are there, Grutter's guys are there. It's a kind of an interesting moment because it seems very showy. Again, in the other film, it would have been done with drones and been this big moment. Here, it's quite sedate, but there's a funeral procession for him. But Grutter's guys eventually kidnap Joe's son, who we'd seen in the very beginning of the film. I think they've got this house that they're building outside of town or something like that, and they are sort of holding up there. But eventually Tony comes along, and he's able to get Joe's son away from Grutter and his men. But Joe has died in the process. I think, Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, is that where Joe dies? Is at that house?
Yeah, he gets Joe's shot on the stairs in the half-built house,
Yeah, and Grutter is, by today's standards, he's not really, really bad guy, but he does have this one goon who he keeps sort of addicted to drugs. He sort of pays him off with drugs, so he's got him addicted, and he'll do whatever Ritter wants him to do. So he's the one who actually kidnaps Joe's son at one point. And they eventually get out of there. Tony gets the son out, and sort of the resolution of the whole film is Tony's final heroic act. Even though he's not such a great guy, again, this is late characterization, but I feel like there's this sense that I got to get the kid home to his mother. I've got to cut off this, generational crime thing and make it so that Joe's son is not one of us. Ends up being a very hallucinatory ride through Paris. I mentioned before there were no seatbelts as they were driving, but, if you're dying, I guess you don't care about a seatbelt even for the young passenger. And then the final shot reminded me a lot of Chinatown, where Tony kind of dies behind the wheel after delivering Joe's son to his mother. And, there are people milling around in the street, but it almost seems like this is no big deal for them. And this is kind of exactly the fate that awaits someone like Tony. So
the movie goes full on Hamlet at the end, basically. Pretty much everybody dies. Everybody, and even the loot is lost, isn't it? That nothing survives. The police even get the money. Nothing goes to any of the protagonists or their families.
Yeah, and I should say
comes
that
to zero.
The one thing that wasn't so impressive was the amount of loot that they get out of the deal. It's a couple of necklaces and earrings and things.
Yeah.
And rings. It seems like they went to a lot of effort. So I'm assuming that those necklaces were just worth an amazing amount of money, or that was considered a big heist in the 1950s, whereas now you've got to steal 3 of Cleopatra's eggs. Or
you need to find a Nazi vault full of millions of tons of gold.
So
otherwise, it's just not worth it. Not worth it. Not worth it.
Yeah. And that film was made for about 500. No, I don't know how much it was made for. It was it earned about 500,000 worldwide in 1955. So
would have been made for a tenth of that or something.
Yeah, probably something like that. So again, it's much more subtle than Red Notice, which is not hard to do, but it's a lovely film.
It's definitely successful, I think, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it absolutely succeeds in what it sets out to do. It's a real noir gem. It's fantastic. Yeah. It won Jules Dessin Best Director at Cannes in 1955, I think.
Okay, nice.
So it was recognised as a great movie at the time. And there's no big question about what this film is about. I think the themes are central to every scene in the film. I think, isn't it? Well, it's a crime doesn't pay, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. And it's not. I mean, it doesn't really glamorize the characters that much. I mean, I think there was probably this infatuation with gangsters and crooks at the time, but there's not the sort of I don't know, like the showmanship of Red Notice or the fancy clothes, the fancy transportation, all that.
You don't come out of Rififi thinking, I want to be like those guys. I mean, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but a beautiful film all the same, and certainly worthy of its accolades, especially for the actual heist scene.
I mean, I think there are some questions about the film's attitudes towards women, maybe that make it a little bit of an uncomfortable view these days, but it's interesting to approach how to see how the two films approach world building, because the world of Rififi feels it's entirely self-contained and completely consistent, doesn't it? It feels like a very believable world. There's some wonderful shots of Paris street life in the 1950s. You feel really grounded in this, real proper physical place. The scene towards the end where Tony has to kill César. There's this little bit of dialogue. César is tied up, and Tony tells him, I liked you, but you know the rules, and then shoots him, because he's grasped on his co-conspirators. And I feel like Rififi is a movie that really knows the rules, and it really knows the world that it's trying to describe, and it's entirely consistent and and keeps it up. So I think that's one of the reasons why watching the film you're so suspended in the moment. It's really believable. That whole world is completely solid. Yeah.
It's believable, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And there's at least one rule, right? I think in Red Notice, I'm not sure there are any rules, and it's completely unbelievable, obviously. And in fact,
yes.
Do you see anyone die in Red Notice?
That's a good question. I presume. Well, I presume that lots of SWAT team members in ski masks die, but they aren't real characters and they don't really exist.
And you don't, they don't get
Sotto Voce die? I'm not sure that he does, but then maybe he doesn't again.
He doesn't. No, because he's chasing them in the bull ring in I think that's in Valencia, right?
Yeah.
Which I think sort of says something about the film. Like, there's a lot of careless attitude with a lot of characters in Red Notice. It's like there's lots of gunfire. We really never see anyone die. Whereas in this film, the protagonist has to kill one of his buddies, and the people who do commit the crime, they all die. I don't think anyone else dies necessarily, but. Which is funny because if you compare the number of gunshots in the two films, Red Notice definitely wins the day. But there,
it's like Red Notice spent the entire budget of Rififi just on blank rounds, didn't they?
So that I think that just it's more careless with both its characters and their lives, I guess.
So. I think you enjoyed Red Notice a bit more than I did, but I don't think it can hold a candle to Rififi, and I hope maybe you're right that with digital lower budget filmmaking becoming more widespread and online distribution becoming more available, maybe we will see films that are more learning the lesson of pure cinema for something like Rififi.
Yeah,
but I know that Red Notice has already got the green light for 2 sequels that are going to be shot back to back. So we're definitely seeing more of Red Notice. I don't know whether there will be enough Rififi to offset it on the other side of the scales. If anybody wants to watch either of the films, so Red Notice is available all around the world forever, entirely on any screen that you can log into. Rififi, I think there is a Criterion Blu-ray that's available. I think it is available on some online services. It's worth tracking down. Absolutely. It's a beautiful gem of a film.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Yeah. And Red Notice, I'm just trying to be more optimistic as I get older. So I think the 2 things you've just mentioned are examples of my success being more optimistic, trying to look for some good in Red Notice, but also hoping that, yes, indeed, there are more films that learn lessons from Rififi in the future as opposed to those that receive them from Ad Notice.
Right, this has been the Two Real Cinema Club. Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and we will speak to you again next episode.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.